Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. My name is Mars, and today we're going to talk about the problem with magic true double hand. And guys, it's been a minute. I apologize. I feel like my uploading schedule has been a little bit disrupted. IRL stuff, been super busy, whatever. Either way, I'm glad to be back today. Today we're going to talk about something that I think is kind of obnoxious about Brave Exvius, but also provides an opportunity for something that we can look forward to in the future. So before we dive into Magical True Double Hand, let's talk a little bit about kind of the origin of the whole double hand versus dual wield sort of thing. So in the beginning, we had dual wield and we had double hand. Dual wield was always king because it doubled your attacks, and it only took up a materia slot with Zidane, and then innate dual wielders came along and all that other stuff, and double hand didn't really have a place to compete, and that was because you only cast it once, and yeah, your attack would be higher, but not by enough to justify the loss in the second attack. But these two different, I guess, damage families sort of evolved over time into what we're starting to see today, which is where we have true double-hand damage dealers that use two-handed weapons that provide damage variance, that get to multicast their abilities and do a ton of damage, and then our true dual wielders get a different benefit where they automatically cast their abilities twice when they attack. And yeah, I mean, like that's still the main perk. And so of course between each of these two families, there's main draws and there's main perks to using true double hand versus true dual wield. Now, which family you choose to join is probably going to be determined by what gear you actually have access to. So if you have true double hand stuff, you're probably going to build true double hand damage dealers, and the reverse would be the same for true dual wielders. Now, if we're looking at true double hand for physical damage, we get some pretty significant benefits, or some perks, or some pros, whatever you want to call them. The most important benefit that we get when double handing is the damage variance increase that comes with using a two-handed weapon. That's huge. With someone who uses a pretty standard two-handed weapon, that's a 30% increase to damage, assuming all else is equal. In addition to that, we also get accuracy, and another smaller perk is that you use your total attack value for all of your multicasted attacks, which is not the case when dual wielding. Dual wield, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, when you dual wield, you actually use the attack of each respective weapon separately, and you don't get the attack of the other weapon per attack. So when you're double handing, you get the total attack of your character when multicasting. Now, of course, it comes with some drawbacks. Generally, double hand damage dealers have a lot of MP that they have to burn through to use their rotations, especially when they're triple casting a lot. Another con is that self-imbues or innate elemental attacks are pretty uncommon, though characters like Axstar are going to start normalizing that. We're going to start seeing that a lot more. It's pretty huge to have characters who can give themselves an element to chain with when they also get the two-handed weapon variance. And then that kind of ties into the last con, which is that two-handed weapons rarely have elements, and those that do are generally STMRs, or they're weapons that are not the most optimal for most characters. Like, currently there are no two-handed katanas in the entire game, for example, and so getting damage variance from a katana is going to be impossible unless you get Axstar's STMR, and even then, it's non-elemental, so you're going to have to use it on somebody who can imbue themselves. Now, if we compare this to true dual wield, there are definitely some trade-offs if you decide to go dual wield instead of double hand. Of course, one of the biggest things with dual wielders is that their MP cost is much, much lower. Their MP sustain is usually much easier to manage. In addition to that, elements are a lot easier to manage as well, because you can just equip an elemental weapon, and if it's a little bit lower attack, not the hugest deal, you can still get that elemental attack in there, and you don't have to necessarily sacrifice damage variance in order to add an element to your attack. And then, of course, the other major pro is that your attacks hit twice, which is obviously the initial main draw of true dual wield. Now, of course, the cons are that you don't have access to damage variance, which was the main feature with true double hand, and also lower effective attack for wielding two weapons, and we'll talk about this in more detail here in just a second. Now, of course, the big major thing that is going to come down the line with the future true dual wield users, CG Lightning, CG Barts, and others that come down the line, they're going to change the mechanics for these particular true dual wield units so that when they are chaining, the maximum chain modifier that you can get, so when you cap out your chain modifier, it caps out at 6 times damage instead of 4 times damage. So, true double hand damage dealers are stuck at the 4 times cap in the JP version of the game, whereas the true dual wield damage dealers have this 6 times modifier. This allows you to choose. Do you want the higher chain mod at 6 times for dual wielding, or do you want the extra damage variance that comes with double handing? And it's really nice because the two sorts of damage families have evolved to having separate identities with separate perks and reasons why you might choose one or the other if you are in such a position where you can actually choose between them. Now, this is where we start talking about magic true double hand, because this is where I think we have a problem. So if you look at the perks between, double handing or dual wielding, respectively, between attack and magic, we have the 6x chain mod on dual wielders, we have the damage variance from double handers, but when you look at mages, when you are dual wielding or when you're double handing, the only benefit that you get is additional magic, and this kind of sucks in my opinion. When people look at units like Chain or Karlette, who offered true double hand stuff, or Christine's STMR that offered true dual wield stuff for magic, people associate that in their mind with the physical damage dealers and their dual wield or double hand materia, and they think, oh, well, I have a true double hand set for physical, now I need a true double hand set for magical. And the reason that that's not true is because all you get out of the deal is extra magic, which of course is helpful. I'm not saying that these are bad. What I'm saying is that they could offer a lot more, they could be more interesting. And so that's one of the things that really bugs me, is that, people got the payout for investing in true double hand, and people will get the payout for investing in true dual wield. But for mages, there's not that significant of a payout. Yes, you get the increased magic value to your damage, but that is it. You don't get any additional fringe perks like the extra casts or the extra damage variance or the extra chain modifier. You don't get anything extra. So people will say, well, mages don't need that. They say, but Mars, mages have an advantage because most bosses have higher defense than spirit. And that has traditionally been true. However, even with historical fights, it's not that true. Most fights have pretty similar defense and spirit, and those that don't, they're old at this point. Like, most of the stuff that we're going to get going forward, you're going to find bosses with very similar defense and spirit. So while it may be true in times past, we have to understand that we've only got one fight in the whole game that was tuned to 7-star units at the time of release, which means that it's irrelevant. Take a 7-star mage or a 7-star damage dealer of any kind into the older content, and it's not going to matter what the boss defense and spirit is. Going forward, what we have to deal with is defense and spirit on bosses that is relatively similar. So for that reason, I don't think that's much of a point of debate any longer. Yes, that may have been an advantage for mages previously, but today and moving forward, I don't think it's a good enough advantage to consider mages. So let's look a little bit more closely at some of the distinctions between magical true double hand and true dual wield compared to their physical counterparts. If you're comparing true dual wield, let's look at a traditional physical true dual wield chainer such as Reagan. If he has Ultima Blade and whatever the sword is called from Gilgamesh Kai, if he's got those two equipped and his total attack is 2,000, his real attack value for each attack is actually going to be closer to 1,800. And this is because each attack only uses the attack from the weapon that is actually physically attacking. But of course, to compensate for that, he gets the bonus of being able to hit twice. And then in the future, when the increased chain modifier is added to true dual wielders, that will also be a perk that he gets in addition to hitting twice. It's going to easily compensate for the drawback of having a lower real attack value. True dual-wielding mages have the unique advantage of using their total magic value regardless of whether or not they're dual-wielding, double-handing, doesn't matter. They get to use their total magic value for all of their ability casts, but of course they don't get the additional perk of hitting twice. So anybody who might say, well, you know, dual-wielding mages, they get to use their total magic. Yes, that's true, but they only hit once. they don't have any other perk. If you ask me, that only equalizes it with standard dual-wielding. Once you throw in the 6x chain mod with dual-wielders, the true dual-wield mages start falling behind. But that's not the end of it. It gets even worse with true double-hand magic damage dealers. Because if you compare against a physical damage dealer, they get to use their total attack value for all of their casts, and they get the additional damage variance on top of that, which is huge. That's a huge increase in damage if you're comparing a double-hand damage dealer versus a damage dealer who does not have damage variance. It just adds that extra 30% damage. But if you're double-handing as a mage, you get nothing for it except perhaps a higher magic value, which of course, like I said, that's great. Getting super high magic values is helpful, but you don't get this large additional bonus of using a two-handed weapon that gives you variance. So just like if you're true dual wielding, you automatically get that 6x chain modifier with those future true dual wielders, and then with the double handers you get the 30% variance. But what do you get for being a mage? You get nothing. You get nothing if you're double handing, you get nothing if you're dual wielding. The only thing that you get is using your total magic value for all of your attacks, which for me, that's kind of a bummer. It deters me from wanting to pull for dual wield or double hand items for mages. Now, of course, if I get them, I'm going to use them. Cool. It'll get your magic value higher, which will increase your damage. That's great. But you don't get any sort of fringe benefit that actually adds unique value to using a mage. And I think that's fundamentally one of the problems that holds mages back in Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. We all know that they're typically underfavored for a lot of content, and it's because of little things like this. So for me, this means that because magic damage is determined by the total magic stat of the caster, magical true double hand and magical true dual wield are completely irrelevant. Since neither give a unique benefit, go for whatever gives you the highest magic, which is kind of a bummer because when you're invested in these other builds for other characters, you get additional benefits beyond the additional stats. So when you're double handing, you get the additional accuracy, you get the damage variance, you get the full attack value on all of your casts. That's great stuff. That's more than just having high attack. If you're dual wielding, you get the lower MP costs. You get the extra chain modifier in the future. Okay, that's not a thing right now. That's going to come later with CG Lightning and other chainers later. But when you're double handing or dual wielding as a mage, you get nothing. You get the same number of casts on all of your abilities, same MP costs. Like, it literally changes nothing. It just is two different routes to getting the highest magic stat possible, which means that it's ultimately irrelevant which one you choose and kind of invalidates the system as a whole. Like, why would you build it this way if you don't get an additional fringe benefit? So going forward, honestly, I would love to see some changes to the true double hand and true dual wield mechanics for mages. And how those mechanics change, I just have some ideas. These are just spitballing. These are things that we could throw into the game that would make double handing or dual wielding worth it. You get that extra benefit in addition to simply getting higher magic stats. So for example, if you're dual wielding as a mage, why not get 2 casts? You know, you could have the same limitations as a physical damage dealer where you don't get to multicast 2 times hits, but it would save on your MP costs, and some casters really only cast twice most of the time, so why not save on some MP? Why not have an MP smart build, or have it so that you can cast multiple times with a single cast when dual wielding? Why not do that? Another idea of a concept that would be interesting is if dual wielding added a scaling in peril based on your true dual wield percentage. So if, for example, if the magic true dual wield cap was 100%, and you had 100% magical true dual wield and you cast an ice attack on your opponent, it adds 100% ice imperil to it. In addition to other imperils that might apply or whatever, you could balance that however is necessary, but it's an idea of an additional benefit that you could get for being a true dual wield mage. Another thing that I think would be really cool to see coming into true dual wield mages is that they get the element from their equipped weapon added to their attacks. So if I equip a rod that is dark element, then now my casts are going to be dark element in addition to whatever elements they might already have. And this would breathe life into older mages such as Transterra and people like that, who only chain non-elementally, and their future chaining compatriots who they could potentially chain with are elemental chainers, and so this could bring them back into relevance. Another thing that I think would be interesting if we want to take a support perspective on this is to make it so that when you cast an elemental ability as a true dual wielder, you also buff your party's elemental resistance to that same element. So how cool would it be to go into a fight and to be able to damage a boss with an ability that also increases your resistance to that element of damage? So, again, these are just ideas. They're things that I think would be cool. I think conceptually, if we added a little bit of a bonus like that to magical true dual wield, it would make it more interesting for most people overall. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, well, what about magical true double hand? What crazy ideas do you have for this? I think there's a few things that would make true double hand mages more interesting. So number one, I think self-damage mitigation when multicasting would be a huge plus. Because one of the things that is concerning about mages is that sometimes they can be really squishy. Not all the time, of course, and this is something that can be experienced by physical damage dealers, but if you had true double hand mages, like you could say lore-wise, they get a little bit of extra damage mitigation because they're holding their rod or their weapon in two hands and they're able to fend off attacks like that or whatever. Like, adding that little extra bit of utility will make more mages useful for more fights going forward. Another technical thing, so if we're talking about, okay, you get damage variance for double-handing attack, you get an increased chain modifier for dual-wielding attack, why not just increase the severity of self-finishing chains? So if you're chaining with a mage who has self-finishing attacks, or maybe they don't, make it so that they are self-finishing attacks. So instead of being like Orlando's Divine Ruination, where most of the damage is spread evenly across the attack, change it so that most of the damage is delivered on the final hit so that you get additional chaining bonus. It would have a similar effect to True Dual Wield, where you get the extra 6x modifier on your damage. It wouldn't be something that you see or that is super flashy, but it would help with their overall use. Another idea is to just ignore more spirit when double-handing, because we know that one of the things that's going to be a pain is bosses who buff themselves and you can't necessarily break them or whatever. Make it so that when you're double-handing, you ignore some more of that spirit. You get some more damage out of it. And I know that it's not going to look super flashy. It would be something that would just be, a byproduct of double-handing, but it could definitely help. Now, one of the other things that I think would be interesting is if you had a MP cost reduction that scales with the amount of magical true double hand you have equipped. Like, for example, if the cap is 300% and I have 300% equipped, then I get 50% MP cost reduction. Or if I have 150%, so half as much, then I have 25% MP cost reduction. Something like that to kind of give you that little extra utility that comes with going for, a high-end damage build. So those are just some of my ideas. I honestly could see it going any direction, but this is the sort of thing that I would really, really hope to see from Brave Exvius in the future, because it's true. Mages have gotten the short straw over and over again in the game, and the way that they try to combat it sometimes is by releasing bosses with low spirit or by releasing bosses that are physical damage immune, but that's just a band-aid. If you want to make mages interesting or relevant, you gotta add stuff to their kit that makes them interesting. Don't make them just be giant beaten sticks where they just quadruple cast their foes into oblivion, or if they don't succeed in one turning their opponent, they just die because they're made out of cardboard. You gotta make something that's interesting, that makes them as viable or as useful as physical damage dealers, and those are just some of my ideas of how to make that happen. So You guys let me know. Tell me in the comments. Do you see a similar problem that I see with magical true double hand? Ultimately, this is the reason why I don't think people should pull for it in general. Of course, I'm not saying it's bad. You're going to get a higher magic than if you didn't have true double hand stuff in a lot of cases, but that's the only thing that you're getting. And for me, that's a pretty big deterrent. So please let me know down in the comments below, do you think we have a problem with magical true double hand or true dual wield? Do you agree with me? Do you think that something else should be done to make them better? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see everybody in the next video.